You know, originally I wasn't gonna do a how to train your dragon video for the upcoming film because I had literally no idea of what would be a fair fight. Because, like, what do you want me to do? Compare it to Godzilla and he dies in, like, one hit? And then I thought of this, and I realized that Skirk is coming out soon. So, I guess it's thematic enough. So, screw it. We have big dragons here, and we have an alpha dragon here. Is Toothless strong enough to beat these guys? Can he beat the Sovereigns? Can he beat the Valen? Can he beat just the elemental dragons in general? Well, let's start off with the scaling for Toothless. So keep in mind we will be pretty much using all of canon Toothless, and things like the comics, the games, the TV show are in fact all canon to the mainline films as well, so those are completely fine for scaling. So getting into the scaling, even for his lower ends, he should scale above the midder dragons, being their alpha and being able to harm other alphas like the Bewilder Beast. However, we're going to get back to that later, as that would be quite important a little later. And a ton of just random dragons perform a lot of city block and multi-city block feats, and even some small town level feats, as shown here. Such as knocking over rocks, and even just some of their dragons' kinetic energy. So, or even smashing through trees, and melting boulders, and melting trees, once again smashing rocks as well. This is incredibly consistent and is, like, for dragons, much weaker than Toothless. So this is quite consistent to say this is a lower end. And however, you can get higher as the kinetic energy for the dragons that will be produced is quite large. As we know, one of the dragons is as fast as lightning. In fact, he's noted as quite slow for a dragon, and all the other dragons usually have higher speed gaps, or even one for the lower ones. And this goes to the Bewilder Beast, who, when you calculate kinetic energy, would get into the small city level ranges, while a lot of the other dragons simply just get into those town ranges of power via their kinetic energy. However, when it comes to Toothless's higher ends and higher feats, it's actually quite consistent. Shockingly enough, that Toothless would be in the mountain to island ranges of power, funnily enough, and maybe even country level, actually. Which, once again, this would be due to Toothless once again being able to harm and even just break off the tusk of the Bewilder Beast, who the Bewilder Beast could simply call out an island entirely, a large mountain level feat. But this is not nearly as where it caps. Once again, Toothless is an alpha and can harm other big alphas like the Bewilder Beast, and as an alpha he should obviously scale above everyone else. Even other large class dragons that should be in the alpha tiers of power. Green Death, for example, can cause a volcano to erupt and destroy this entire island instantly, and to no one's shock, this feat is a large island level feat to, once again, no one's real surprise, with statements even saying that characters like the Screaming Death can casually engulf smart islands, which we just see this do, where they do this several times at once with like a single attack, with this just providing consistency, as this is also a large island level feat, which is consistent with even just random dragons creating a large earthquake getting into those island ranges of power as well. So very consistently, Toothless would range in those large island tiers of power, not only from people even just quite below the alpha dragon, but people on his similar caliber, even if either slightly below him or slightly above him. However, as I mentioned before, there is actually one calculation that could arguably get Toothless into those country plus ranges of power, as there's a creature called the Fireworm Queen, whose body is said to be as hot as the sun, which, due to its size and how hot it would be, which would get into the country plus level of power for a high end. However, this is a high end, and you can argue it might be inconsistent, but large island plus especially quite high into the tier when it's coming from people who should be below Toothless pretty significantly as well for some characters. Not all of them, but some of them, like once again the random dragons, would be quite below Toothless, I'd say. And Country Plus isn't that big of a gap. I mean, there's a pretty big gap. A country plus character is easily going to beat up a large island character any day of the week. But still, it's not like the worst gap in the world, so I don't know if I'd be enough to call it an outlier or something. So if you want to consider it, then sure, that's fine. Otherwise, yeah, no. Toothless should just be in those large island ranges of power. For speed, not only can he create supersonic booms, and he just stated supersonic, unironically, a couple of times, so at the very least, he should be in those supersonic tiers of speed. But there's higher ends, as we kind of been mentioned before, with even like quite slow random dragons being able to turn into lightning and fly at such speeds. And this is consistent with other dragons having statements to simply fly to the moon quite quickly, which is also a massively hypersonic feat. Not only is Toothless just has higher speed stats than these dragons when we look at things like the guidebooks, we also just know that Toothless is the fastest dragon outright, and his species is considered the fastest dragon outright. So he just bare minimum upscales everything in the verse. Now let's move on to the Genshin Impact Dragons. I know there's a lot more, but there's unironically too many, so we're going to do a gauntlet and just compare most of them, as they mostly scale to the same things, just kind of upscaling them to differing degrees of power. So the order we will be discussing is, first we will have Fallen, then Durian, then Zhongli / Aldea, and finally Neuvillette and Apep. And I guess you can throw in any sovereign in that tier of power, but when I'm using Neuvillette and Apep is we actually see things from them and we actually know their scaling. The Fallen should range from those mountain to large island tiers of power, since we're going to start off with him, since he is by far the weakest elemental dragon on this list, and probably one of, if not the weakest elemental dragon that we get to know and spend time with in the game. Since, I mean, he is especially like one of the first guys we fight, so it's not really surprising when the character is constantly growing stronger over time, even if he was buffed by, honestly, the weakest archon aside from 2, I guess. But he would range from those, as I said before, those mountain to large island ranges of attack potency, due to him being able to fight on par with a prime Barbados in the past, and currently, while the Fallen is weakened from his poisoning and slumber, is still able to fight completely on par with Venti and characters amped by Venti's power, who current Venti does still hold some of his previous past archon power, though him being quite on par with Barbados in the past, who was significantly in more of his prime than he is now, is a lot better of a feat. And this is consistent, as this dragon is also stated to compare to the gods of old, just in general as well, more or less just Barbados. So you can argue he'd upscale off of things like Morax as well, which would provide consistency to this, who will get to Morax, don't worry. And there's like several mountain level feats, as Venti himself in the past cut off 2 mountains and then tossed them into the ocean, creating new monuments, this feat getting into the larger mountain levels of attack potency, which is consistent with even people quite below Dvalin like Shenhe, freezing waves with such power it can destroy mountains as well. A big wolf god, who Venti can disperse the storms of, and should be weaker than Dvalin, all things considered, when with Andreas just kind of fighting a weaker traveler with less help than the traveler that fought Dvalin, who was amped and had more help, especially from an archon when Dvalin was weakened. Andreas creating large island level storms, since Dvalin also has statements arguably comparing to Raiden, who has several large island level feats, such as cutting through islands actually, creating large storms, creating large shock waves, etc. It is pretty much just a stat stick for the rest of the top tiers to upscale or downscale from, with even random gods that Raiden one-shots, creating islands in themselves with their pure mass. I also know there's some country level calcs, which, I mean, there's a lot of ratty higher end scaling for Genshin. I might just make a whole video later on how bad that is, and just going through each kind of line of reasoning and debunking it. But hey, if you want to see that, please let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to make a video explaining why Genshin just kind of really caps at large island, maybe country. But I don't necessarily agree with the common country calcs that are used on Versus Battle Wiki, for example, which the first one relies on a pretty obvious hyperball, in which it's stating that the sound of a wave shakes the entire planet to its core, and also a higher end for Venticalcs, assuming it's literally reshaping the entire continent, which is never really implied in the aforementioned statement when Venti sliced the mountains in half and through them. Nothing states like the entire continent was reshaped by this. We do know a bit of the area was reshaped, but this calc assumes that the entire continent was fully reshaped in itself. For speed, there's a ton of casual hypersonic to master the hypersonic calcs at first. For Raiden several times, and even for non-archon users such as Layla, Cloran, among many more, they should be on screen. Everything from dodging missiles and bullets to moving as fast as lightning to traveling large distances in a short period of time. For hacks in the Valen's case, it doesn't have much. He's the dragon element, god of animo or wind, so he can manipulate that. Toothless in the first round, does he win? He should be a good decent bit stronger. He's even just higher into large island level, and with his higher ends, he's just flat out stronger. And while Dvalin kinda compares to island level stuff, Toothless just casually upscales from even random dragons who perform similar feats. And they are relatively comparable in speed, and their hacks are nothing really of note to each other. While Dvalin is more experienced, Dvalin doesn't really know how to capitalize on this experience as some of the other characters on this list, especially with their hacks and such, which we'll get to. Toothless probably just edged out in strength a little bit. Durian, I'm not going to cover that much, since Durian's big feat is really just that he fought and is clearly the superior to a Prime Barbados, and Dvalin, who we just covered, should be in those large island tiers of power and massively hypersonic speeds. Doesn't really have any like crazy hacks to note. He's literally just a decently stronger Dvalin and Barbados, though nothing quantifiable. Even, I don't know if you want to times it by 2, it still should be lower than the output that Toothless is casually throwing around. And Dvalin, unironically, probably has less hacks than what Durian's throwing around, considering he's like the master of animo and such, which could still pose a little bit of a problem for Toothless, considering that the animo would probably absorb most of his fire attacks. Durian doesn't really have this, he just upscales them to a higher degree, an unquantifiable degree I might add, so Toothless slams. Now moving to Azalea and Zhongli. You'll be fighting them separately, but they scale to each other and fight to each other, with Zhongli conceding that he is in no way superior to Azalea, so it's quite fair to just say these two would be in the same realm of power, even if you think one is slightly above the other, for example. I think it would be quite disingenuous to say that, oh, like, this guy's one-shotting the other or something. Like, no. Obviously, they upscale off of everything they said before, as Morax has the status of one of the old gods, who was previously mentioned as being someone who the elemental dragons compare to, though the old gods are superior. With this being consistent, as Zhongli could casually throw around large mountains, so Zhongli and Azalea would be in those mountain to large island levels of power. Speed is once again the same as mentioned as before. He simply just upscales off of those same feats, being a archon and an elemental dragon. However, Zhongli actually has, unlike Dvalin and Durian, a lot of hacks in his favor and a lot more fighting experience, battle intelligence, etc. He's actually really smart for one. He's been around for like, what, a couple thousand years? And it's even stated that Zhongli just seems to know everything about everything, which is quite the insane statement. He's just been around for so long, he knows so much shit, including about combat, with Zhongli having the ability to seal people away, attack, including sealing souls. He can petrify people and turn them to stone, manipulate the element of Geo or the earth. He has durability negation with some of his weapons, shields. I think Toothless is going to take the L here too. He's a bit stronger, but Zhongli has dealt and sealed with opponents clearly stronger than him before, and he's simply just so much smarter, there's not that much of a difference for Zhongli than him fighting any other ordinary, physically stronger monster than him. Especially when they're the same speed, and this Zhongli can simply just seal him or petrify him. It's really nothing stopping him from that, which is why I simply think that Zhongli, and apparently Azalea as well, is probably gonna take the win. I think Azalea is a bit more debatable, as Azalea doesn't really have as much hacks as Zhongli, and Toothless is technically stronger, I guess. So, if you want to say Toothless wins there, sure. And Zhongli just wins because he's a lot smarter, has similar experience as Azalea, and has like crazy hacks for a Genshin character, then sure. Finally, at the top of the tier, we have the two sovereigns. Once again, you can just kind of put any sovereign here if you want, but I'm going with the ones who actually do shit in the story, since we've only really seen two, and one kind of mild one who's kind of weakened. Though I don't know if this really counts, because the whole point of the Abyss is just kind of copying him. So I'll leave that up to you guys. Once again, if you want to throw in any sovereign here, be my guest. I'm just talking about nimble and ape specifically, because they have specific statements and feats that we can actually quantify. Unlike the other, which you just kind of have to assume they scale to nimble and apep. And why do I say that being a dragon sovereign is important, you might ask? Well, it's quite simple. They pretty much just upskill everything to a higher degree. If anyone is potentially country level in Genshin, it's these guys. Or Skirk, but that's a really different topic. Aside from, like, I don't know, the obvious people above them. I'm talking about playable characters, or characters like we see a lot of in the story or something. So obviously I'm not saying that they're above the unknown god or whatever. Don't misinterpret that, please. Has just blatantly stated that dragon sovereigns like Toothless just rival the entirety of the human realm, and it even goes on to say he would judge the 7 archons with these resulting in physical altercations, with this including Raiden, Mavuika, and the previously mentioned Zhongli. And he even scales to the all-devouring Narwhal, which is consistently stated that he's not only the largest threat that Devat has ever seen at this point, and it's stated that he over time just flood and destroy Tevat in its entirety, and the Narwhal will be fine. With Apep themselves just being around for so long, and just absorbing constantly so much energy, that they just surpass most other dragons because of this, with how much energy they've just been sitting around and absorbing. Meaning they all just upscale the previous calculation speed feat to a much higher degree than before, especially if we take the rivaling the human realm in its entirety at its most literal. For hacks, Nimble has sailing hacks, he can absorb energy and use it to heal himself, teleport, has force fields, can manipulate any facet of water in any way. He could transmute things, amplify himself for others. Apep can manipulate and create life. Force fields can buff himself and others to use portal attacks and sense elemental energy, and is the most adaptable being in all of Tevat. So this is just a bigger stomp than the Zhongli portion. They're the same intelligence, if not smarter, probably more experienced, just as hacks busted, and probably just flat out comparable in strength with Toothless, even with the country ends. If we take the statement in its entirety, then we can just kind of calc stack at this point to get a higher end, because you can just times the calcs by a couple times, since like a lot of characters use scale to these large island feats, and then Nuvalet would just be souling them at once, or Apep would be souling them at once, by if we take the statement hyper literally to compare to Toothless's own higher ends. More or less the fact that they're just so much smarter, equal in speed, and can just use their hacks to win, which would be a lot more of a better win con than Toothless slowly overpowering them. So, in conclusion, while Toothless would do pretty well, he's simply not on the tier of a true sovereign like Apep or Nuvalet, or even on some of the higher tier archons. I think this is how it would go with most of the archons. Toothless would do pretty well. He could beat some of the lower end archons, but when it comes to even like Zhongli, Raiden, Mavuika, he just can't really deal with them, all things considered. It's not really in his pay grade. And then like people like sovereigns, and even like above that, just whatever the hell Skirk is, just beat him up. Like Skirk in itself is an insane topic I need to save for another day. Skirk in itself is like probably is just the flat out strongest character we've ever been able to play as in Genshin. Flat out, no holds car regards. Would probably beat up Nuvalette and Raiden in a 2v1 while doing a tap dance, and I'm genuinely serious about that, by the way. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. Peace.